Go ahead.
Well, we are live, Aaron.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to show my name, and now I'm going to show your name. Okay. And now I'm going to get rid of the promo, so the screen is split.
Okay.
Okay. So here we are. If you could move just a little bit back from the camera.
Better?
Okay, I think that's pretty good. Okay, so I think that we're good to go. The only thing I'd suggest is a part of your chin is getting cut off a little bit. So if you can adjust the screen a little bit. Oh, that looks good. That looks good. Okay, you look really good now and not at all fat. Okay?
Okay. No, thanks.
Okay. Hi, everybody. How you doing? I see people are here already. Okay, there are some 15 people who are available now, so we'll wait for a couple of minutes, and then we'll get started with a little more people. Yes, and in the meantime, we'll have a little drink of water to get started.
So if I use this chat window, is that so everyone can see it, or is that just you, Joe?
Okay, I'm not sure what the chat window looks like.
On the bottom left. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
There is a comment capability. You ought to be able to comment on that. I'm not sure if the chat actually does it, okay, or it's just for me. Okay.
I think it's just for you. That chat little thing is the only thing I see, and it looks like I'm talking to myself. So.
Well, it could be because I don't have my arrow down far enough. But of course, if I do that, then a part of my screen is cut off, so I can't see you. So that's not very good.
It's all good.
Okay, I think we're good now.
Okay,
so I think we're good now. You should be able to see comments, and there are quite a number of people saying hi. So I think we'll get started. This is Joe Firestone. It's Saturday night, okay, at 8 o'clock. I'm here for Real Progressives. And my guest for tonight, okay, is Aaron Godfrey, who is running for Congress in the primary of the Democratic Party, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In the Ohio 16th.
That's right.
Aaron is running as a progressive, and he was recently endorsed by the Ohio chapter of Our Revolution.
I would say it's probably more accurate to say the Cleveland chapter, because I don't know if there's something going on in Cincinnati or Columbus, but the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus.
Okay, the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. That should be a famous county for us because, as I recall, that was Dennis Kucinich's territory.
And he's running for governor. He was also endorsed by the CCPC. So.
Yes, he is running for governor.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful if he won. Okay, because they gerrymandered him out of his seat.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be fitting revenge if they had to contend with him as governor of the state of Ohio.
Yeah, especially with I know it's pronounced gerrymandering, but I can't help but say gerrymandering, but the state house districts are pretty horribly drawn too. So the Republicans have had a supermajority there for a long time. I can't imagine how Russell their jimmies would be if they had to deal with Kucinich in the governor's office. Pretty funny. Sweet revenge,
that would be
I guess.
Pretty funny if they had to deal with him. And if we got a Secretary of State in this time, that would be wonderful too.
Yeah.
If you've got a combination of both in, it would be very different. Okay, so would you like to say a bit about your background, just a minute or two, and then we'll get on to the issues.
Yeah, sure. So this is a new thing for me. I have a master's in physics that I got from Miami University down in Oxford, Ohio in 2010. So I'm a scientist by trade, but like a lot of other people, I've been inspired by Senator Sanders for a very long time, but he when I saw Trump's inauguration, that really kind of pushed me over the ledge. And I thought, if I can deal with campaigning, if I can deal with everything that it entails, if I know that the things I believe in and would fight for would help the people, then I have no excuse to not try to run for office. So I'm very much running out of I don't want to say sense of duty, because I feel like that sounds arrogant, but because I know what it's like to grow up. I'm 31, so let me start there, because I know a lot of people think I look a lot younger than I do. That's just finish the baby face, exactly. I know what it's like to grow up in a post-Reagan America, where, and honestly, I blame a lot of the troubles I had dealing with growing up on Ronald Reagan and his beginning of the trickle-down economics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I know what it's like to have to get by in this country today. I come from an upper-lower class family where paycheck to paycheck. I have a master's in physics. I still basically live paycheck to paycheck myself, and that seems messed up to me, but that's the price you pay if you want to be a poor kid who goes to college today. So I'm running on a whole lot of issues, mostly, I'm doing this to represent the people and to fight for them, and not take the sides of corporations over people like we see Trump and his friends doing every day. But
okay, so if I can say, I don't think that sounds like it's arrogant at all. I think it's the attitude people ought to have right now, and the attitude they ought always to have had. Okay. So anyway, let's go to the issues now. Okay, and I look at your site, and I see that you're about transparency in government, okay, and also accountability to the people.
Yes.
So what I'd like to know is what you mean by transparency and what you mean by accountability. What is transparency for you? How far does it go?
As far as legally allowed, as far as like the Freedom of Information Act is all fine and dandy. It seems like there's a bit of a delay to it, if you ask me. And I basically, if people ask me a question, I'm going to be honest with them as much as I can be. And obviously, if you're in a position of power, and there's certain things you can't get into because of security or whatever, but I mean up to that limit. I want to be as honest.
Okay, let me say something about that, or ask something about that.
Okay.
You're running for Congress.
Yes.
And when you get there, you'll have something to say about the limits of security. Mm-hmm. In other words, I've been looking at something for a very long time now, since the 1950s. I'm sorry, since the early 1970s, okay, when I wrote a paper about that. And that was the constitutionality of the application of the secrecy rules in the federal government. I argued at that time that the constitutionality of the application of those rules was very questionable at that time. Things have gotten even worse since then. All kinds of things are classified because they are politically sensitive and might hurt either one of the major parties or the other major party. Okay. Mm-hmm. But depending on who's in power. And the parties routinely use the classification rules to declassify things that embarrass the other party that's not in power. Okay, right. And all that is going on all the time. Now, that has to be ended. What would you do to end it?
Boys, that's that's going to require like a full scale audit of everything about the system, right? Because it shouldn't be used for political purposes at all. And that's what we just saw with the Nunes memo and the Schiff memo, is it weaponizing classified information, which is, I in my lifetime, I have not noticed that being, I haven't seen that being a huge problem. It's only really since Trump's been in power that I've at least noticed it. But I know it probably goes back way into Vietnam.
Yes, it has been a huge problem, actually, right along constraining our democracy. Mm-hmm. So one thing I was interested in was, okay, it seems to me if someone's really serious about transparency, okay, in government, then one has to put in controls on what will be classified and what will not. And wherever the classification rules are vague, they need to be made very specific so that things that don't fit in with specific rules cannot be classified.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now to say that, or to act as if you can classify things that are politically sensitive, okay, in some way, is really way beyond the way the law is supposed to be applied, okay, at this point. I think there need to be penalties for misclassification, and there need to be prosecutions. And I think one thing Congress has to address is how that might be done so that people can learn the truth and can really have a say in what is supposed to be a democracy.
Yeah, and I think that when you're talking about this, I completely agree with you. But when I think about the logistics of how you would manage that, because the problem with having people audit classified information is that they have to have access to classified information. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I 100% agree with what you're saying, that we should do this. We should prevent things from being classified for political reasons. But man, how do you address that? Like the most obvious.
I'm not sure how to address it, okay, but I submit that it's the job of Congress to figure that out.
Absolutely, and I think
that's why we elect Congress people.
Yeah, I think the most obvious thing you could do is establish a panel that goes through things as they're classified and determines whether or not this is something that deserves being classified.
And actually has the power to punish people who go too far, in other words, who go over the line. Okay, and that's especially true where they're going over the line about things that are political issues. In other words, anyway. Okay, I don't want to spend the whole program on this, so I'm going to move on. Okay, to accountability.
Yeah. So I think
transparency. I have the general impression that you believe in highly transparent government and will propose laws and try to pass laws to make it highly transparent, even in the areas that are now secret and that are kept from us.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place for, the Freedom of Information Act, I think, was a great step in the right direction. We should bolster it, make it more, what am I trying to say here? But as far as transparency, I'll just say Freedom of Information Act is a good place to start. I'd like to see it. I don't want to see it go anywhere, that's for sure. And we need to be able to make it more accessible to the people, so everyday people, you don't have to be some journalist with a ton of credentials to be able to do an FOIA request. As far as accountability goes, and this kind of ties into transparency a little bit, but yeah, the biggest thing we can do is stop gerrymandering, however it's pronounced. And at least in Ohio, that's a huge, huge deal. We finally have something on the ballot in May that's going to help us stop it. But even that plan isn't going to be perfect. And the best thing we can do is make every district as competitive as possible. I know it's going to be impossible in most states to do that, but it's something we have to be striving for. If I were in charge of the maps, if I got elected and I was in charge of the maps, I would draw myself into a competitive district. If I don't have to fight for the vote of the people, then who am I accountable to? With our current representative, Jim Renacci, you see exactly this going on. People who are Republicans in this district, in last election, he won by like 30 points. But when you have someone like Renacci with the magic R next to their name, they don't have to be accountable to anyone. The Republicans think they have this great champion on their side fighting for them because he's a Republican just like them. He's not listening to anyone. He's not listening to Democrats. He's not listening to Republicans because he's going to win no matter what, the way these districts are drawn. But that comes back to, so this ties in with transparency, especially in that this district is gerrymandered to hell and back. It goes all over the place around the rural areas around Cleveland. But I would hope
so let me go back to transparency for a second, okay? One of the big problems now in transparency is that there is prosecution for whistleblowers.
Yeah,
for people who uncover crimes. So what do we do about that? Do we make it a crime to prosecute people who are whistleblowers? Do we make that a crime?
See, I like these questions because they make you think. Because all the whistleblowers should be protected, obviously, but if someone is trying to be a whistleblower and goes the wrong direction and says too much or exposes too much, it is a national security threat. And they should have. We can't just say all whistleblowers are protected from prosecution, because if they did leak something that wasn't appropriate to leak, then they shouldn't go without. I don't think anyone.
Okay, here's the point. Okay, like words like something that's appropriate to leak or something like that are highly vague.
Yeah, they're very.
Now it's precise to say. Okay, it's rather precise to say that if someone is a whistleblower and they blow the whistle on something that isn't a legal act, okay, that is a crime, then shouldn't that obviate them of any possibility of prosecution or safeguard them? In other words, if they make public a crime, then aren't they benefiting our democracy? So that's the question. Can we make that the test?
Yeah, I think so. If they're whistleblowing on a real crime, like a real no shades of gray here, then they should absolutely be protected. Because I think at the end of the day, then you do come down to, and WikiLeaks, Kelly Gata just says WikiLeaks ... I think that's WikiLeaks is a unique situation because they're clearly co-opted by a foreign adversary, and I think that the more we're finding out from the Mueller probe, the more it turns out that seems to be true. But independent whistleblowers.
Okay, so I'll put another question to you. Okay, which is, okay, so let's say they are in league with a foreign adversary. Okay, let's say that. Okay, and let's say that they've leaked things, however, that are entirely true.
Yeah.
Then what?
Then you prosecute the person for being a traitor, and you prosecute the person for whistleblowing on. Well, I'm using heavy language. I'm exaggerating.
Right. Okay. What I'm saying is, they can be in league with a foreign adversary, but if at the same time they give us facts that we need to know about, even if they've done it for the wrong reasons or the wrong motives, okay,
well, the way
then why ought they to be prosecuted?
Well, so
and then also with Russia, okay, specifically with Russia now, I don't see that we have a declaration of war against them at all by the Congress. I know that we contend with them, okay, and in international affairs, sometimes our interests and theirs happen to conflict, okay, and I know I'm willing to concede, okay, that they try to interfere with our elections, okay. But God damn it, so does Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Are we saying that people who are in league with Saudi Arabia, we ought to prosecute for being traitors to the United States? In other words, who's an adversary and who's not? There are many foreign states that are trying to shape our political system for their own advantage. How is Russia different from all these states?
I would say they're not, but let me be clear. So the approach I would take to that is if they leak classified information but happen to be in bed with an enemy or, like just a foreign power or whatever, we should take action with the stuff that they leaked on, obviously, because if it's a crime, it's a crime, and there's no shades around that. But we can't just ignore the fact that they're trying to subvert our government one way or the other. Like if they're trying to subvert our government, they should be held accountable for that. So that's a different. I'm not a lawyer. I addressed that at the top of the show. I would say that because we can prosecute them for acting adversarial without prosecuting them for whistleblowing. And I think those are two totally different things. But
it's going to be very tough to make that particular distinction. It's also, by the way, going to be tough to prove that WikiLeaks was in league with an adversary. In other words, what tests are we using? Now, I know that there were a number of people that have been indicted by Mueller for acting as agents of the Russians. Okay, but the fact remains, we don't know if they were, even though they're indicted, they haven't been convicted yet. So we don't know if they're guilty or not under our system, right? I mean, we don't know that, okay? And he hasn't indicted any WikiLeaks people as far as I know yet.
I haven't heard of that yet either.
And he may not even indict them. So how can we assume, okay, that WikiLeaks was an adversary working in concert with a foreign government to disadvantage the United States?
This is where the fact that this is an ongoing investigation is going to diminish our understanding of the entire scope. Because for all we know, Mueller knows this, and he has definitive proof that this is what was happening. But what we can say for sure is that we've seen the proof that WikiLeaks was talking to the Trump team and what they were doing. And, I can't think of off the top of my head whatever definitive evidence may or may not exist as to WikiLeaks being traced back to Russia, but there was, for a time at least, that was about the media, if you will. But it's an ongoing investigation. They're not going to tell us everything while it's going on. And I think that is the right move for this investigation, because the more they say, the more everyone else is going to try to, scare you under them. It's like turn a light with a room full of roaches or scare you away. We don't want that to happen.
Okay, so I think we spent enough time on this. I want to get back to the gerrymandering or the gerrymandering issue. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it either.
Yeah,
okay, I'm a political science PhD.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure how to pronounce it either. Okay, I have to look it up in a dictionary and see. Okay, but anyway, we both know what it is, however you pronounce it. Okay. Yeah. And so the question is, we have had instances where cases involving the gerrymandering have been brought up before the Supreme Court.
Wisconsin, yep.
Right. And so the Supreme Court has the right at this point to arbitrate whatever Congress decides to pass.
Mm-hmm.
So you have certain reforms that you want to make in those areas. Are you clear that the Supreme Court would not be overturning a law that you would introduce into the Congress?
I think that the best example we can use for this is what just happened in Pennsylvania, because the Supreme Court, as I recall, denied the appeal of the Pennsylvania Republicans to reject the way the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled there, because the judge or this Pennsylvania Supreme Court said clearly this violates the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania, not the United States. So that means the Supreme Court doesn't really have a say in that. And I think that if the Supreme Court, and I want to, as I recall, they last mentioned this a few months ago, as I recall, the Supreme Court sounded like they were being favorable at regulating gerrymandering. But if they say that the judicial branch has no business monitoring the way legislature draws their maps, and that's historically been their stance, then we need to take it to the state level like we're doing here in Ohio. We need to have these anti-gerrymandering rules drawn into the constitutions of each state, and Ohio is making the right step in that direction. Pennsylvania is clearly on the ball with it. Sounds like, I forget if it was South or North Carolina, but one of the Carolinas are on it too. And at the end of the day, if the Supreme Court's going to go their 5-4 route against the people like they've done so often in recent memory, then it's going to fall to the state. It's going to fall to the people to be able to petition their government to put their own issues on the ballot, like the fair elections campaign here in Ohio has done to force the legislature's hand and force them to take up the issue of gerrymandering. What we have in Ohio came as a result of the Republicans saying we need a say in this, because what the fair elections people are bringing up is going to decimate our ability to control the districts. And we had someone in the State House come to the floor and say, make no mistake, they want fair representation. I can't imagine a more un-American sentiment than someone coming to the floor of the State House in Columbus and saying they want fair representation like it's a bad thing. You want to say something? Go ahead.
Okay, so so what happens if the Supreme Court does persist and they vote by 5-4 to allow the states to do what they want, and we then have a situation where half the states in the union change their districts so there are fair elections in those states, and half the states in the union really don't want to have any fair elections, so they keep the unfair representation.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what happens? Okay, so then what does Congress do about that? I ask you that because you're running for Congress.
Yeah.
And then for state legislature.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so what can Congress do to overturn what the Supreme Court has to say?
at that point, it'll come down to a constitutional amendment, right? That's the only way you can. That's the best way to overcome a Supreme Court decision. And I think.
Okay. So now I'm going to give you some information.
Okay.
That is not the only way to do it. What I suggest is you read Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution.
Okay.
And you will find that Congress has the right to restrict the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court on matters that it wants to restrict their jurisdiction on. So, for example, in the case of campaign finance laws, or in the case of legislation involving control on gerrymandering by the states, there could be placed a prohibition under Section Article 3, Section 2, prohibiting the Supreme Court from actually reviewing the legislation. That is something which the framers put into the Constitution. It's perfectly constitutional. It has never been used, but that doesn't stop it from being used, okay, at this point. It would not be unconstitutional to do it. It's part of the system of checks and balances which the framers, okay, set up. Okay, so my question to you, which I don't expect an answer to right off the top of your head at this moment, okay, but my question to you for consideration is, would you consider, if the Supreme Court continues to be recalcitrant and obviously undemocratic, as a progressive, would you consider using Article 3, Section 2 to restrict the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court?
I mean, as you describe it, sounds like a great idea. But this is
okay. So I will tell you this. Okay, Tim Canova has signed on to this.
Okay.
In Florida, and there's also something out there called the Contract for American Renewal.
I remember you sent me that link a while ago. Yeah.
Yes, I sent you the CFAR link, right?
Yeah.
Okay, a while ago. Okay, so they have placed this in as part of their contract. Okay, and they have something like 30 candidates across the country that are now signed up to a minimal progressive contract, such that if people sign on to that contract, then the voters will easily be able to distinguish those who are real progressives from those who are not. Okay, and this also establishes some accountability for congressional candidates also, because once having signed the contract, if they don't go along with legislation that is in accord with the contract, then in town halls, okay, and other environments, they can be brought to account before the voters by citing the contract, citing their actions, and pointing out that they broke their promises. So that's accountability.
Yeah.
Okay, of the highest order, I think, available to us. Okay, at this point.
And I would agree. When I speak of accountability, to some extent, I'm speaking about within my district to the people here, and that I would have town halls open as I could, talk to people directly, let them talk to me, have as much of an open door policy as possible, and just generally be there. Don't just disappear the second I'm elected. Like, still go to the regional club meetings and stuff like that.
Oh, I know that you have that in mind, but there's the other aspect of accountability too. That if you make certain promises to people, then you ought to be accountable for those promises, and that's where a contract like the CFAR comes in.
Yeah.
Okay, and since it's a minimal contract, it doesn't restrict you from going beyond the contract. Okay, for example, there's a provision in the contract that specifies a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Okay, but that doesn't stop a candidate from thinking and from advocating for a $20 an hour minimum wage if they think the $15 an hour is generally not adequate for the United States. And there are some candidates who are already going to $20 an hour. The advocacy for $15 an hour started maybe 5 years ago or something like that. Now, we've had some inflation since then and some changes since then, and that was inadequate also in terms of keeping pace with productivity gains.
Yeah.
So there's a case to be made now for $20 an hour as opposed to $15 an hour. But CFAR doesn't call for that, but it does call very definitely for $15 an hour.
Yeah, as a Florida, I think that's a good idea, and I think that it needs to be chained to some economic metrics to make sure it stays livable. Because when Walmart was doing this whole PR bit about raising their wages to $10 or $11 an hour, everybody's like, "Oh my God, this is so generous and amazing of Walmart to do this." And if you actually crank out the math, that's like from $8.15, which is minimum wage in Ohio, that's like it's a small raise. It's a good raise, but in Ohio, in my district, that still only pays for about 80%. That's still only 80% of your check still goes to rent. And that's unacceptable because you're not just paying rent. I wish I was, but that's not the case. So
yeah, you have to hold down 2 or 3 jobs in that instance.
Exactly. Yeah.
At a minimum wage, and that's not really doable for people.
Yeah.
Okay. So your next area that you talk about on your site is healthcare. Okay, and there you're talking about a Medicare buy-in. And you talk about a public option, but you don't.
Let me be clear right here, because I don't remember what our website says. I am for Medicare for all, absolutely. Like I might, I don't remember what I wrote on my website. I might be tiptoeing around the issue, but Medicare for all is the end game. That's what we actually have to get to.
Okay, so are you for HR 676 specifically?
HR 676. Let me Google that real quick.
HR 676 is John Conyers' bill. Okay, it's been introduced in every session of Congress since, I believe, 2002. It was there in 2009 when the Affordable Care Act was passed. It's been revised and refined over the years. It's a 35-page bill that covers co-pays, it covers deductibles, it covers psychiatry, also dentistry. It covers all basic healthcare services with no co-pays and no deductibles in the bill. Now, there are reasons not to like the bill, which have to do with the pay-fors, but we will get into that, okay, at a later time. But from the benefits point of view, okay, it's a beautiful bill. It could be implemented within a single year. It currently contrasts with Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, which he wants to implement over 3 years. And that gets me to my next question, which I want to raise to you. Okay, that question is, are you aware of the fatalities that occur each year in the United States due to lack of insurance?
I know from personal experience that it happens uncomfortably often. Do I have exact statistics off the top of my head? No.
Okay, so I will give you a few statistics, okay? There was a survey done by some people from the medical school, at Harvard in 2005 that computed the rate of fatalities and the overall fatalities. Okay, the rate was roughly 1 in 1,000, for the uninsured people. And overall fatalities in 2005 were 45,000 people died unnecessarily because they didn't have any health insurance. Now, over the years, those fatalities have changed. However, generally among people who are progressive, they get lazy often when it comes to numbers. You as a physicist ought to know that. And so year after year, they would quote the fatalities as 45,000. They were still doing this in 2009, when Obama began his own drive, for reform of healthcare. they were still quoting 45,000. But by 2009, of course, compared to 2005, the population of the United States had increased by a considerable amount. In 2005, the population of the United States was something like 295 million. Now, in 2018, the population of the United States is something like 326 million. Okay? Mm-hmm. So it was also found through other refined studies over the years that the rate is probably not 1 in 1,000. It's probably 1 in something like 830 people who die. Mm-hmm. Now, the number of fatalities was moderated by the Affordable Care Act, but the Affordable Care Act still left something between 30 to 35 million people uncovered by insurance and subject to those fatality rates. Okay, 1 in 830, or some studies showed 1 in 769. There was even one outrageous study that it showed it was 1 in 300 some odd, but that's probably not accurate. It's probably somewhere in the 1 in 800 area. Okay, mm-hmm. So we are talking about something like 38,000 people still dying under the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, so that's unacceptable.
So here's Bernie Sanders. He comes along, and his latest effort is to put forward a beautiful Medicare for All bill in terms of the benefits, but he wants to phase it in over 3 years to give the insurance companies time to adjust. I guess mm-hmm. that's what it is, or to avoid disruption, excessive disruption. Okay, in the first year, he would cover 1/3 of the people. So notice, he's still leaving 13,000 lives on the table. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the second year, he covers another 13,000 people. But even in the third year, there are still going to be 13,000 unnecessary fatalities because he won't implement the thing inside of a year.
Yeah.
Because he wants to give the insurance companies time to adjust. Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyway, that's the choice between 2 Medicare for All bills, okay, at this time. Of course, the choice between a Trump-type bill, okay, and either of those two is really gross. We're probably talking about 60,000 fatalities with the Trump-type bill, okay? Mm-hmm. But I'm really not, it's not so much that I'm focused on the numbers here. I just want to make you aware of the fatalities problem and the implications of delaying the whatever healthcare reform you should come up with your colleagues in Congress.
Yeah.
Okay? It's important to consider these implications. And we're not just talking about fatalities. We're talking about family breakups. We're talking about bankruptcies. We're talking about the mortgages that fail to be paid due to healthcare debts. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a major cause of all those ills in the United States, and a major cost of not having passed the Medicare for All bill in 2009 when Democrats had the chance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to defend for a second Bernie's approach of phasing it in. Now, I'm not saying I support everything the way he posed it, but when you're talking about something as big a part of the economy as the healthcare industry, you can't just shut it down overnight, because it's not about like what happens to the insurance companies. I don't care what happens to the insurance companies. They're not my concern. What I care about are people who work for them, who lose their jobs or income from their livelihoods if you just shut them down overnight.
Okay. So there was an econometric study done in 2009, okay, by the California Nurses Association.
Okay.
And it showed at that time that if you transition to Medicare for All within a year, the net effect after the loss of jobs in the healthcare industry, okay, the net effect would be a net gain of 2.5 million jobs to the economy if you passed it.
Over what period of time?
Over a period of a year. Okay. They were talking about that as an economic stimulus. So that's what the only quantitative study that yet exists showed.
I have seen that, so you send that to me. I'll read it. But let me say though that the people, I assume this is an assumption because you can have read the study you're talking about. I assume that the jobs they're adding, what they're talking about, are probably going to be jobs in the healthcare industry, like actual providers of healthcare, like doctors, nurses, radiology techs, and whatnot.
Okay. Wait. In the way of doctors and nurses, okay, and people like that, to change the healthcare industry would not have an effect on those things. Okay. In other words, what it would affect is the insurance processing and the insurance industry, but it wouldn't be affecting the providers. Okay, remember, we're talking about a Medicare for All bill. It doesn't directly affect the providers.
No. I understand that. Like the providers will be fine because you're going to be giving them a whole lot more customers. But what I mean is there are people who aren't the providers who are caught up in the system, whether or not they want to be there. But if you kill their industry overnight, they have no job. And that's my concern.
Okay, well, first of all, it's not overnight. Okay, it's within a year. Okay, and second of all, there are probably 600,000 jobs to lose in the healthcare industry now because, of course, the healthcare industry has profited very much from the Affordable Care Act. And so it has added jobs over a period of years. So now, whereas in 2009 we were looking at 450,000 jobs, we're probably looking at 650,000 jobs now. So there would be 650,000 jobs lost in the private health industry, but also there would be people picked up by the Medicare program because of the expansion of the Medicare program to everybody and to the elimination of deductibles and copays also. Okay. So we're talking about a net gain of jobs, okay, in those areas. And then if we're talking about the stimulus, which would be provided, if we look at it from the econometric study viewpoint, which indicates that it would involve an expansion of the economy, there would be plenty of other places for the other people to go. And the thing to consider is whether or not they were involved in the healthcare industry. If, in fact, as we now know, those people who were doing the processing were involved in, to use the colorful term, what might be termed essentially murder by spreadsheet, why should they be allowed to continue murdering by spreadsheet? Why should they be allowed to continue that even for another minute?
So there's two ways around this that I see. One is if we go with Bernie Sanders' route, what we could do is just provide the safety net. Like if you don't have health care, you're not going to die because you go to the hospital, we got you covered. That way the insurance industry has time to transition and they have, and at this point, they're basically an industry on life support. But the point is the people that work for them will have time to find something else to do. The healthcare industry will have a chance to expand outside of their existence and no one dies in the process. As long as you write the legislation such that people have healthcare no matter what. Like if I didn't have healthcare today and this was enacted tomorrow, I would still be able to go to the doctor, get everything covered, no copays, no deductibles, or anything like that. It's covered, nothing to deal with. That's one way to deal with it. The second way around it is if we go with your plan, we do the rapid adoption of Medicare for All. Sorry, there's doctor floating around. But if we go with the rapid adoption of it, then the other way around is just to make sure we have the safety net to deal with people who are going to get laid off in mass from insurance industries that suddenly contract in a very rapid pace in a short period of time.
Okay, so let's get to talking. Let's get to talking about the safety net then. Okay, we've been through healthcare, and also gerrymandering. Okay, let's go first to student loan debt. Okay, because that is very important. Yes. Are you for essentially forgiving all student loan debt?
So let me take you through my train of thought here. For a long time, I suffered from a great deal of student loan debt. I'm a poor kid who went to college, which isn't something you're supposed to be in this country. But I've always wanted to advocate for canceling student loan debt. But as far as I've known, as far as I've seen, there's never been anything to really say that was a good idea that will blow up the economy. As much as I know from personal experience of injecting millions of dollars into the economy, you have to have something to back that up. So my initial plan was to address student loan debt by making it more manageable for the students. But then a group of economists from the Sanders Institute released this report a few weeks ago saying, hey, this is actually a really good idea.
Yes,
so
I
finally,
know. I'm in very close touch with those economists.
yeah,
They are people from the MMT school.
yeah,
And I write about MMT all the time. In fact, I was about to bring up an MMT proposal to you.
oh, go ahead, by all means.
In relation to the safety net. Okay, but okay, so let's
finish doing that real quick then.
Yeah, let's finish that.
Just to wrap it up, because it seems like you know where I'm going with this. That I think gives me the study that I need to base that policy off of. Canceling student loan debt is, I forget the name of the report off the top of my head, but they laid out very clearly that this is a boon for the economy and good for everybody. And let me tell you what, on behalf of my entire generation, we need it. I would love to own a house one day, but the way it goes right now, I never will. I would love to have disposable income one day, but the way it's going right now, I never will.
Okay, so let me tell you, okay, that in my estimation, the people who did that report, okay, who worked on it, are among the finest economists in the United States right now. They are really, really good.
Okay.
They don't come any better than Stephanie or Scott Fulweiler, okay?
Yeah.
Or any of them. They're really terrific.
Yeah, I've talked to Stephanie a little bit offline. I like where she's coming from. I like what she's got to say. So.
Yeah, talk to Scott Fulweiler also sometime, okay? And go into the numbers with Scott.
Okay.
And you'll see what you're dealing with there. Okay. That's another issue, okay? Okay, so we wrapped up the student loan debt. Okay, so let's get to the safety net thing, okay, because I don't really see it on your program, okay, but a favorite proposal, okay, coming out of the MMT school, okay, of economics, is the idea of a federal job guarantee, okay, and what that is about is providing a job offer, a full-time job offer, okay, to anyone who wants one at a living wage. Now, some people advocate a fair wage is different from a living wage, okay, and higher. There's someone, okay, in Georgia who is not actually, okay, an MMT economist, but he's running in the Georgia 10th. Okay, his name is Richard Dean Winfield. And he advocates for a federal job guarantee with a fair wage of $20 an hour. The MMT people don't have a consensus on what the wage ought to be. I have in the past advocated for $18 per hour as an average across the country, but cost adjusted for each of the regions in the country. So in the middle of New York City, it might be $28 an hour. Somewhere in the middle of Kansas, it might be $15 an hour, $14 an hour or something like that. Okay. Okay, so there are different kinds of estimates of what's a living wage, okay, and what's a fair wage, and those details would be worked out in Congress.
Yeah.
Okay, but what would happen there is all the people who are not employed, both those who are visibly unemployed and those, okay, who are not counted in the statistics anymore because of the changes in the definitions over a period, okay, of years, would then be employed. There would be true, full employment in the sense, okay, that anyone who had a job, who wanted a job, would be able to have one, paid for by the federal government, defined by local communities, though, and administered by local communities. It would not be a federally administered program. It would just be a federally funded program, okay, with the checks going directly to the individuals and not to the authorities and local communities for distribution in order to prevent pork, okay, from, getting into the program. Yeah. Okay, there would also be very good fringe benefits, okay, that would be attached to the program. So once you're talking, let's say $20 an hour, You're talking something like, well, probably 50,000 a year per person, okay, to calculate, okay, its costs. But on the other hand, if all the people involved, by my calculation, some 24 million actually found some jobs, had some jobs, then lots of other safety net spending that we have now would no longer have to be made, because these people would all have a living wage.
Yeah.
Right. They would have a living wage, and in fact, the wage involved could be taxable, depending on tax rates.
They only tax disability, right? So why not?
Well, yeah. Well, also certainly taxable by the states. I mean, states are starving for funds to fund the services that states used to provide and would like to still provide.
Well, as far as I remember from school, I might be a little bit off the mark here, but I recall that during the New Deal, we had a similar system to that. We had some sort of a job guarantee, and this is something that FDR posited decades ago, right? So.
Well, not in the same way. Those were federally controlled. Okay. In fact, the head of one of the jobs programs, okay, the first head was actually a general. Okay, I forget if it was the head of the WPA or the CCC, but there was a general, and there were tents involved, okay, in the program, and there was a reveille in the morning. That's not the kind of thing we have in mind here. Okay, what we have in mind is that the unemployment offices all across the country would be turned into employment offices, and they would be places for people to meet and to hang out and to decide on jobs they wanted to take. And not only that, but if people wanted to define their own jobs through defining social ventures that had social value, then they would be able to develop essentially proposals to do that, being paid while they developed the proposals, okay? And then those proposals would go up to local authorities and to federal authorities so that they would approve or not the new social ventures, okay, depending upon whether they produce social value in the eyes of the local communities. So a whole host of things could be funded in such a program, and it would go way beyond the New Deal in relation to allowing social control and bottom-up participation of the people who are involved in the program.
Yeah, okay, I mean, I don't know what to add to that. I like the idea. I like it a lot. So.
Okay, so if you like the idea, okay, then there's immediately a place for those insurance company people who are now working in the murder by spreadsheet program. They would be able to do things that are a lot more productive from a social value point of view and get paid a fair wage to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that could certainly tide them over as a transition job. Okay, and if they wanted to move into the private sector again, they would be able to move into the private sector when the private sector actually adjusted, and they would not be moving into the private sector from a starting place that was unemployment. In other words, you wouldn't have the problem that you have now. Someone's been employed for 6 months, so they're stale. They've developed some bad habits. They watch, too much television, or they've been out of work for a year, and same thing. The economists call this the hysteresis problem. Okay, that problem would not exist for people within a job guarantee program.
Yeah,
because they'd be maintaining their skills or even increasing their skills, because the job guarantee program would offer retraining facilities for them and computer facilities for them and education and software if they wanted it, and all kinds of other things that could be offered by the job guarantee program. And not only that, but people who are in the job guarantee program could move if they wanted to. If they wanted to get out of Flint, Michigan, because they don't like the poison water anymore. They could move to Colorado.
Is it delicious?
where a job guarantee would be waiting for them in Colorado. I'm just selecting Colorado as a place where the water is supposed to be pretty good. Okay, but the basic point is, okay. So anyway,
Cleveland's pretty good myself, but maybe I'm biased.
Okay, what I'm saying is maybe this is something a lot of people in Cuyahoga County would be very interested in.
I think so, but I have to ask you a question because I like a lot of what you're saying, a lot of the things you propose, a lot of the legislation you support, but you are recommending a tremendous amount of social change, a huge change to the entire makeup of the country's economy. And I'm just wondering what you think the priorities should be on those things. Because if you ask me, the first thing I'd say is healthcare. Deal with that first. Then maybe address student loan debt. Then maybe address the job guarantee. But, at the same time, it's always going to depend on the political climate of D.C. or the state houses or whatever. So how would you prioritize these issues?
Okay, the way I prioritize these issues is actually very much the way that you would prioritize those issues. And that's because I don't think it takes very long to pass a Medicare for All bill, and I don't think it takes very long to pass a job guarantee bill either, because details on both are well worked out, and the policy proposals are available, waiting to be drafted. Okay, in Congress. In the case of the healthcare bills, one doesn't even have to wait for them to be drafted; they've been drafted and are introduced already, and also Congress introduced a jobs bill also, which could be modified to fit to fit a bill which was like the MMT job guarantee bill. Okay, I don't think it would have to be changed by a lot. Okay, to do that.
Real quick,
okay, and then
I just wanted to say Molly brought up something in one of the comments I just saw. And I just want to say, I'm not saying I'm not advocating for tremendous change in society. I think that especially my generation has an appetite for that. I'm just, I wasn't trying to say I wasn't for that. That's all. Sorry. I just saw Molly point that out, and I wanted to make sure I addressed it. Go ahead. Continue.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, so as a third priority, I consider this very, very high priority. Okay, and one of the reasons is because it would be easy to do. Mm-hmm. Is to eliminate the student debt. I mean, that is a travesty. That is horrible. I would not even be opposed to compensation going back a particular number of years to students who have already paid their student loan debt. Okay, but the reason why I'm so profligate, okay, with the money is for another reason also, and I guess we want to get to that.
That's the core basis of MMT.
Right. Okay. It is the core basis. Okay, of MMT. Okay, and it also relates to climate change. Okay, because climate change is going to be very, very expensive. Okay, I do want to make one point about the job guarantee, which is very important also. Once that federal job guarantee is defined at some wage, you don't need a minimum wage bill. That becomes the minimum wage. It's the de facto minimum wage. Okay, and private sector companies are going to have to meet it. If they don't meet it, they won't get any workers. Okay, so we can see. So Walmart. So Walmart's going to have to pay more than $20 an hour. Okay, and if that cuts into their profits, and if the Walton family doesn't want to do Walmart anymore, fine. That's
Walmart,
just fine.
The greatest of welfare in this country.
Right. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so climate change is going to be very, very, very expensive. I've seen a proposal which is very credible, and which was produced actually by an MMTer, that calls for expenditures of $44 to $6 trillion a year on climate change. And that involves a lot of other things, infrastructure, a job guarantee, all kinds of things are wrapped into that. But it still would actually represent an enormous increase in federal spending. Okay, so the issue is how are you going to pay for it? Okay.
Oh, are you asking me how I'm going to pay for it?
Yeah,
I thought you wanted to go into something. Sorry.
I have to raise the question. You're in favor of a lot of the progressive programs that you've mentioned on your website, and you seem very favorable to the programs that I've mentioned, okay, in addition. So somebody's going to ask you the question, how are you going to pay for it?
So that's a good. I think first off, if there's ever a time when it became absolutely clear that the deficit does not matter, it is on the right after the Republicans passed their $1.5 trillion tax bill. So either they know something we don't, or they have a lot of money that they're not telling us about, or the deficit just doesn't matter. And to some extent, and someone earlier asked too, like, what does it mean to be a progressive? Like I don't know if they're asking me or you, just in general. But to that, I would say that progressive is someone who believes in the government is protecting the people from exploitation and providing basic services for the people to get by. And so, as far as that all goes, like the core question of how do you pay for things is don't ask that until the services are provided for. The first thing you should worry about is do the people have what they need to live good lives, and then worry about how you pay for it. Because again, if we can afford a $1.5 trillion tax cut for very rich people, then why can't we afford $20 billion to help people with student loan debt?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you. Here's going to be the answer to that from the other side. Okay. They're going to say, okay, look, Aaron, we know you want to do what's good for people, okay, and we want to do what's good for people also. The problem is, though, that Trump, of course, and the Republicans, okay, have made a great mistake in putting through that $1.5 trillion tax cut and in a lot of their other policies. Okay, but the truth is, we now have a debt of $20.5 trillion. And that debt has got to be paid eventually by taxes. And has to be paid by our children. And it's going to have to be paid by our grandchildren. Someday, some way, it's got to be paid for by taxes. And the debt matters. The level of the debt matters. And the debt to GDP ratio matters. And, I'm very animatedly talking about that now and telling you that. But the Peterson Institute and the network of think tanks in Washington, D.C., that is in front of Congress every single year propagandizing about that and propagandizing on your emails right now about fiscal irresponsibility in the Congress is going to come at you with that and is going to say, how can we bear that tax burden? Do you know what the projections are for entitlements, for Social Security, for Medicare? I mean, if we project out to 100 years, do you know what that's going to cost? Okay. How can we possibly meet all those costs?
Well, that $1.5 trillion tax cut sure would pay for a lot of things we want to do.
Okay, and the $1.5 trillion tax cut.
That was suddenly okay. That was suddenly okay to create that tax bill and to just rack up $1.5 trillion of debt. Then it's okay for us to take that tax cut back and use that money for something else that we deem more valuable for society.
Okay, that's a weak argument, though. The reason why it is because the $1.5 trillion tax cut is really only $150 billion a year. If you wanted to put through a federal job guarantee program, the likely initial cost of that would be about $750 billion a year, perhaps going down to $350 to $400 billion a year on a continuing basis, which is much in excess of the $1.5 trillion tax cut. Well, okay, so I don't think that's really an answer. I mean, I think you can talk about cutting all the things we don't like and raising taxes for people who ought to be paying a lot higher taxes, and it still wouldn't cover all the things we want to do.
Well, let me put it this way. First, a cynical side note is that arguing with Republicans about passing through things that will help the working people is a six-beam task that will never be finished. They will never find it okay to spend any amount of money on poor people in the working class. And that's just the way it goes. That's the reality of what we're going to have to deal with here. But beyond that,
I want to interject. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, if these Republicans are such savvy business people, they should understand what the return on investment is. and what that concept means.
Good.
When you talk about something like, I think so NASA's budget is not very good lately, and if I remember reading something a long time ago, so don't quote me on this because I might be misremembering it, but it was something like for every dollar spent on NASA, it returned $7 in the economy. That's a valuable investment. That cost a ton of money when we first put that money in, but it turned out to be valuable when we got it back. And that's what I would say, especially with climate change, like the return on investment, that's going to be incredible because we don't have to spend so much money on mining things anymore. There's going to be a lot more clean jobs that can't be outsourced, and we have to talk economics with them because if anything is going to change their mind, if anything will, it's going to be that kind of an argument. Return on an investment, it's going to be good.
Okay, so that's a very good answer, but I want to say two things to you. Okay, the first thing is that you'll not only be dealing with the Republicans, you'll be dealing with Miss Pago herself, or you may be dealing with her anyway, specifically Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
Okay? And not only Nancy Pelosi, but Steny Hoyer. And not only Steny Hoyer, but a whole bunch of the other Congress people who probably will be coming back if there's victory for the Democratic Party in 2018, and even if there's not. And they are going to tell you that fiscal responsibility requires reducing the deficit, gradually reducing the deficit. And they're going to go on about that, and they're going to be as bad as the worst of the Republicans in this respect because they've been that bad since the 1980s, and they have never changed. Okay, and they were the ones who supported the president when, in order to stop the crash of the economy, he put in the ARRA, which, by the way, fell short by about $1 trillion. It was only $800 billion. It should have been $1.8 trillion. Okay, and that was too much for them, and they backed him completely when after that he wanted to gradually reduce the deficit so that we had the slowest recovery in history because he pursued those policies of reducing the deficit when he never should have done that. That's the first point. Okay, but the second point is it's because of these constant references to the debt and especially the debt to GDP ratio that you would get continual opposition in Washington, D.C. to these spending plans. So you need a real answer, compelling answer to the how you're going to pay for it question. And I have one, which I'd like to show you at this point. And it's quite simple, and I think it's something you ought to consider. This is called overt congressional financing. Okay, and it's 2 paragraphs. It's a clause composed of 2 paragraphs that could be attached to every appropriations bill and to every CR that goes through Congress.
So this looks like, it just basically kills the spending caps, right? If I understand.
No, it's not just it spills the spending caps. Okay, what it does is this. The first clause says that as soon as we pass this appropriation, the Federal Reserve must place the funds in the Treasury spending account that are necessary to spend this particular appropriation. Okay, and the second is, besides that, the Federal Reserve must place the funds necessary to repay all debt, okay, including interest, that falls due during the period of the appropriation or the continuing resolution bill. So that must go into the Treasury spending account also. Okay, so what happens? Let's say Congress decides to deficit spend, which it undoubtedly should do, and I can give you reasons why this is true also. Okay, so let's say Congress says there has to be deficit spending. Okay, the way Congress will decide on that is when it comes time to write the tax bill, which ought to be separate from the spending bill and after the spending bill. When it comes time for them to decide on the tax bill, what they will in fact be deciding upon is not the pay-fors, because the pay-for would already have been made by the Federal Reserve by their placing the money in the Treasury spending account. Instead, it would be deciding on how to control inflation. They have to tax enough to control inflation, but not more than that.
Okay.
So how do we know how much they should tax? Well, there is a way. There's something at MMT called the sectoral financial balances.
Okay.
And you'll probably like this because it involves a simple equation.
I like equations.
And what the equation specifies is that the current account plus the savings, private sector macro savings, plus government spending, is equal to zero. That's an identity, a macroeconomic identity. Now, we know from looking at historical statistics that when the economy is going well, our trading desires result in a deficit for the current account which is to say a foreign sector surplus, and a deficit for us in the foreign account of 6%, of GDP, of roughly 6% of GDP, because we saw that at the height of the Bush administration. We also saw, in a number of other administrations, including in the Obama time period, that sometimes savings desires of the population of the private sector rise to 6, 7, or 8%, of GDP. That's especially true after a crash, as in 2008. In some of those years, right after the crash, the private sector savings were up to 8 or 9%, of GDP. Now, what do those deficits mean? That is the private sector savings, going to 9%. It means 9% of demand is drawn out of the economy. And the current account deficit, that means that another 6%, is drawn out of the economy. Well, let's say in a normal year, the private sector savings could correspond to a desire of 6%, of GDP. If that's what we think it is, then our full employment target of government spending would be 6%, of GDP to account for the private sector savings, in other words, for the demand leakage due to that, and another 6% for the trading deficit. 6% plus 6% is 12%, of GDP. If our GDP is $20 trillion, for example, at that time, then it means that a full employment deficit, if the deficit was spent on the right things, on good things, not on wrong things, like a tax cut for the wealthy with a very low multiplier, but on the right things, that means that we could run a deficit of $2.4 trillion and not have inflation due to demand pull. In other words, the government spending. There might be inflation due to other circumstances like supply push in certain areas. We have to use some other methods to control that. But the government spending could rise as high as $2.4 trillion without having any inflation. Now, last year, our deficit was something like $650 trillion. The reason why our economy was stagnating, relatively speaking, was because that deficit was far too small. The reason why the economy was good as it was because we were already beginning to grow credit bubbles again, due to the fact that the private sector was expanding debt. Not all the private sector, but people in general were going more and more into debt again after about the 4th or 5th year, of the administration. The Obama administration. The point is, historically, we have been spending far too little in terms of our deficit spending because we do not pay attention to the sectoral financial balances. We do not pay attention to that equation and how it can work in the real economy. That comes out of MMT2. So MMT kind of tells us that other things being equal, and there are other circumstances that can throw this off, we perhaps should be running a 10 to 12% deficit. Okay, instead we've been running like maybe 3%, okay, or a little larger, okay, than 3%, which is about what the European states were running when they fell into financial difficulty after the crash. Okay, remember? Mm-hmm. That's not a big deficit, and it's not enough to keep an economy that has a trade deficit and that wants to save a lot actually growing. It's not enough to keep the people fully employed. Okay, that's why we had a fall off in employment and why the economy stagnated, okay, for so many years. So that's how you determine how much to tax. In other words, you tax to the point of a deficit of 10% or 12% or 14%, okay, or whatever makes sense based on your simulations, okay, and your best judgment. But what we do know is that you tax in order to make sure that we're getting to full employment, but no further. So we would say deficits do matter, but not in the way one thinks. Mm-hmm. They don't matter because they can bankrupt the federal government. But if the deficits are too high, you can have inflation. So you do have to watch out. Okay. But the way you control that is you decide what your needs are, and you decide what you have to spend to meet those needs, and then you decide on how much to tax, leaving enough deficit room to account for the leakages in the demand. Okay, so that is your answer to how you're going to pay for it, and it's a real answer because there's no question Congress has the constitutional authority to do this, to use this clause. There's no question at all they have the constitutional authority to do this. Okay, they can order the Federal Reserve to do what they want the Federal Reserve to do because the constitutional power to spend money is in their hands, not in the Federal Reserve's hands. They've delegated it to the Federal Reserve, but they haven't given up the authority because they delegated it to the Federal Reserve. They delegate a part of it to the Treasury. For example, and this is something most people don't know, the Secretary of the Treasury could have a coin minted tomorrow with $100 trillion value and deposit that in the Federal Reserve, and they would have to credit the Treasury spending account with the $100 trillion. Now, the Treasury couldn't spend that $100 trillion. Congress would have to appropriate spending for it to spend any part of the $100 trillion. So it works in that way. Congress would still control the purse strings, as is appropriate under the Constitution, but they have given the power to the Treasury Department to create money in that way if the Treasury Department actually wanted to do it, which means essentially if the president wanted to do it.
Yeah, I remember seeing a lot about that when Obama first took office during the financial crisis. I remember people talking about printed $1 trillion coin, and I can't remember off the top of my head everything they're talking about. I remember that concept coming up before in the past.
Yes, it was. I was a part of that whole debate. In fact, I wrote a book on the mint the coin thing, okay, and how you use it, okay, and what its implications are for progressive spending, okay, and it's at Amazon right now, okay, if you want to see it, okay. But anyway, the point here, okay, that I wanted to raise is that you're obviously a very progressive person. And you want to do all kinds of good things, and you have many good proposals in your platform right now. But there are still things to learn.
Okay? There's always things to learn, man. If you think you're stopped learning, then you don't have a place in Congress.
Right. Okay, so I took a more active role here than I normally would take, okay, in these interviews, because we had only just a limited amount of time. In fact, I've overstayed my time already. But what I wanted to say is I would very much like you to come back, okay, and to have another discussion fairly well in depth. I'd like to give you time to think about all this, okay, and then to have you back, okay, and have a conversation about it. Would you like to come back?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so what time frame do you think would be a good time frame?
A week or two. It's hard for me to say right now, but a week or two, maybe 3 at the most.
Okay, then let's say 3.
Okay. We can finalize this offline, but that should be fine. Maybe Thursday next time, but
okay. Thursday is okay. I have to check my schedule, okay, and see what I booked. Okay, but I'll be able to give you time. I'm sure 3 weeks out, okay, or a little more, okay, than 3 weeks out. Okay, and I'd love to have you back because I think that you are the kind of person that I would really love to have in politics.
Oh, thanks.
I really would. Okay, and I can see why you got endorsed by the Cuyahoga County people. I think they were endorsing a very good person.
Thanks. Okay. I hope I proved them right.
Okay. Yes, I think you did. Okay. If you want to contact me offline for any reason, please feel free to do so. We're Facebook friends now. If you have any questions, okay, that you want to ask.
If you have stuff you want me to see, shoot it my way, and I'll give it a look over when I get a chance. And just as a note to the people commenting, I've seen a lot of people saying things throughout the course of this I wanted to respond to. After the fact, I'll try to go through and find the comments I can and respond to them. If you want to make sure I see what you said, just tag my Facebook page, Godfrey for Congress, or Godfrey for Oates. No, it is Godfrey for Congress on Facebook, sorry. And your own comment, and I'll come back and I'll make sure I try to answer it. I want to answer everybody's questions, that's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, great. And perhaps in the next show, okay, when we come on, we can devote, let's say, half the show to Q&A. So you'd be able to interact with people in real time. I can arrange that too.
That works for me. I like that idea a lot.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's end for tonight. Okay, and we'll arrange another meeting soon.
All right. Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks a lot, Aaron. It was a pleasure.
You too.